Okay, one more quick video. I almost forgot. I had issues with the power steering. Um, so I'm going to attach a video that I took with my phone out on the workbench, and I'll come back a little bit later and maybe explain it a little bit clearer. So this is the, well, for lack of a better term, power steering pump. It's just a typical vane type hydraulic pump. So as you may recall, this is a different one. This is a 135 bar pump, which is just under 2000 psi. And the reason I changed it out is because the original one was 160 bar or 163 bar. You know, you're pushing 2500 psi. I don't think the Hydro Boost system is rated for that. But anyways, that aside, I noticed when I started the vehicle, when I started the RV, checking for leaks, I found a few leaks on the transmission cooling lines, but I also noticed that there was no power steering. I went for the power steering, and there was no steering. So it's like, shit, I gotta diagnose what's going on there. So I cracked the high pressure port, the discharge port, and then started the engine back up. And if it's leaking, it's building pressure. But there was no leaking. There was actually no fluid movement whatsoever. So I thought maybe it's just a bad pump, but it was a new old stock pump off of eBay. So took it apart. Thought maybe it was a return or something, a failed pump. But I took this all apart. This is the pressure regulator. There's a little spool in there that regulates the output pressure. That pops out. These 4 bolts come out. I wish I would have gotten video. Took these 4 bolts out, and the housing pops off, and there's essentially a cartridge, I guess I'd say, in there. And it consists of the rotor with the little vanes in it that slide out. And then there's also like an oblong shaped shell that slides over there. So it will draw in through the intake port onto the low pressure side of the vanes, and then the vanes push it to the high pressure side. So I know this is supposed to have a clockwise rotation. This pump is supposed to be rotating clockwise. But after examining the internals, it didn't look that way. The way it was put together, if this were to spin clockwise, it wouldn't be pushing oil to either port. So, like I said, there's that oblong shaped cartridge, and it's all individual pieces, and it's held in place with pins. Thinking, well, these engineers make these things universal, right? I mean, you don't want to make 2 different parts when one part would work. So kind of thinking outside the box, it's like, oh, maybe I can turn it 90 degrees. But the pins in there wouldn't allow it. So what I ended up doing is taking that thing, that outer shell, and flipping it 180 degrees, and that put the oval, from what I can think, in the right direction. So it draws from the low pressure side and pushes the oil to the high pressure side. I could be totally wrong, but I reversed that piece, put it all back together. It's a really simple mechanism. And it all went together. There's nothing, it like went together like it's supposed to. So hopefully that's my issue. And we're gonna find out really quickly. So it was kind of interesting. Okay, so after all that monkeying around, it worked. I installed it back on the engine and fired it up, and the steering worked. So just to go into a little bit more in depth of how I fixed it, I put together a crude illustration of what I did to make it a little bit more understandable. I don't know, maybe someone could use this at some point. I don't know. But anyways, here's an illustration. So what we're looking at here is, like I said, a crude representation of how the pump is constructed. So looking on the left side, the counterclockwise direction, the black outline is the outside shell of the pump. The blue part in the center is the rotor. And the black parts are the vanes. And the gray part is that shell I was talking about. So there's two ports for the inlet side. Those are the green ports. That's the low pressure side of the pump. And then you have the high pressure ports, which are the red. They're indicated by the red. So the principle of this thing is like pretty simple. And these illustrations aren't 100% accurate, but it gives you an idea of how it works. So through internal channels and porting the inlet side of the pump, the oil comes into the green. And in this case, for the counterclockwise rotation, the vanes are rotating counterclockwise, and those vanes pick up the oil and push it up the decreasing radius of that oval part, and it expels it out the high pressure port at a higher pressure. That's how this pump was configured. It was configured to be counterclockwise rotation. I needed a clockwise rotation. So essentially, that outer shell is held in place by two dowel pins, kind of in the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position you can see there. So I took that outer shell, and if you can picture me taking that outer shell and just pulling it straight up and then flipping it end for end and placing it back on the pins, that rotated that oval shape 90 degrees. So now when it rotates clockwise, it draws it in the same place, but now it's being pushed up the other side of the pump and expelled out the high pressure ports there. Surprisingly, it worked. And it's not surprising. I mean, I'm surprised I got it to work, but it's not surprising, like I said earlier, about how engineers will make one part be compatible for multiple things. Obviously, these pumps are configurable. These pumps are, they're everywhere. They're on everything, you know, as far as like commercial vehicles, so they have to be configurable. So this pump that I have was more than likely sold under another part number. It's the same pump with the shell flipped, but it just has a different part number, and it's a clockwise type of pump then. So that was pretty exciting, really interesting, but in the end it worked. It all worked out for me, which is just a miracle. So that's that. Next video, on the road. Thanks.